This morning, metal barriers surround the Manhattan courthouse, district attorney's office, and also the U.S. Capitol after former President Trump claimed his arrest would happen today and called for people to, quote, take our nation back. CBS News now reporting that he is not expected to be indicted today, but an indictment could come by the end of the week. Manhattan District Attorney is investigating allegations that Trump falsified business records linked to a hush money payment.
Washington has crossed a threshold that has never been crossed in American history. Lawmakers are no longer debating impeachment timelines or vote margins. They are standing on the floor of Congress and demanding that Donald Trump be arrested, not impeached, not removed through constitutional process, arrested, handcuffed, taken into custody right now. And these are not fringe voices.
President Trump has always denied having sex with adult film star Stormy Daniels and has always claimed he knew nothing about the $130,000 payment she got to stay quiet before the election. But last night, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, who just became his unpaid legal advisor, gave Fox News a different account. He said the president reimbursed attorney Michael Cohen after the election.
These are serious lawmakers with real institutional power who have made the calculation that allowing Trump to remain in office for one more day is more dangerous than the constitutional earthquake that arresting a sitting president would trigger. The bipartisan nature of these demands is what should truly terrify anyone who has been watching this crisis unfold from a distance. This is not Democrats versus Republicans anymore. This is not the predictable partisan warfare that has defined Washington for decades.
When someone says that they can protest, he would probably be referring to my tweet. Educate people about what's going on. He's not talking in a harmful way, and nobody should. Nobody should harm one another in this, and this is why you should really make law equal, because if that was the case, nothing would happen here.
Lawmakers from both parties are converging on the same conclusion that Trump represents an ongoing threat so severe, so immediate, and so incapable of being contained through normal constitutional mechanisms that extraordinary measures are now justified. The question being debated in the corridors of the Capitol is no longer whether Trump should face consequences for his actions. The question is whether the federal government is actually going to walk into the White House and arrest a sitting president of the United States.
This president is a threat to our democracy. He has done things that would cause us to conclude, those of us who have observed closely, that he disrespects the Constitution. He took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution.
These are the scenarios being considered by serious people in serious positions of authority. This is where we are as a nation, at a moment when the arrest of a sitting president has moved from an unthinkable hypothetical to an active policy discussion. The reason this has become a real possibility rather than just rhetorical posturing is that Trump has systematically exhausted every other option for resolving the crisis he created.
Senator Lindsey Graham said if he were Trump, he would take the matter to the Supreme Court.
So I think this is an effort that's ongoing, never-ending to destroy Donald Trump.
He cannot survive impeachment and removal anymore because the political coalition that protected him through 2 previous impeachments has shattered. His party has abandoned him in numbers that make conviction mathematically achievable for the first time. He cannot win in court because judges across the ideological spectrum, including many he appointed, have ruled against him repeatedly and decisively. He cannot negotiate his way out of this because there is nobody left to negotiate with.
I was working for a man who ultimately became president of the United States. And yes, there were things that we did that were wrong. For example, the hush money payment.
The usual Trump playbook, attack, delay, intimidate, and wait for the controversy to fade has stopped working. Every lever he tries to pull is connected to nothing. Every escape route he attempts to take is blocked. Every ally he calls for help has stopped answering the phone. So what remains? When impeachment is moving too slowly for the level of threat, when the Senate trial timeline feels dangerously drawn out, when every day Trump remains in office feels like a gamble with potentially catastrophic consequences, what is the only option left?
The idea of indicting a former president of the United States is deeply troubling to me, as it is to tens of millions of Americans, and particularly happening in what appears to be a politically charged environment.
Arrest. Arrest before removal is complete. Arrest while he still technically holds the office. Arrest is the emergency measure that stops him from governing, from issuing orders, from accessing the nuclear codes, from deploying the military, from doing whatever desperate thing a cornered president might attempt in his final hours of power. There are serious constitutional and legal arguments being constructed right now to justify such an unprecedented action. If Trump is deemed a threat to national security, a genuine and immediate threat that cannot wait for the Senate to complete its trial, then the government's obligation to protect the country from harm might override the traditional deference to presidential immunity. If Trump is deemed a threat to the constitutional order itself, actively working to subvert the very system he swore to preserve, then the logic of self-defense that is embedded in every democratic constitution might justify measures that would never be contemplated in normal times. If Trump is deemed too unstable to have access to nuclear weapons, too erratic to be trusted with the football that follows every president everywhere, then the dozens of military officers and national security professionals who have warned about his fitness might provide the predicate for emergency action. Lawyers in the executive branch are discussing these theories right now. Constitutional scholars are being consulted about the boundaries of presidential arrest. Members of Congress are asking their staffs to prepare legal memoranda on the question of whether a sitting president can be taken into custody if the threat he poses is sufficiently grave. This is not speculation or fantasy or the plot of a political thriller. This is the actual work product being generated in the offices of the United States Congress while the clock ticks down on whatever comes next. The desperation driving this conversation cannot be overstated. We are not living through normal political times. We are living through a moment when the judiciary has essentially rejected Trump's entire approach to presidential power, when his own party has essentially concluded that he is more liability than asset, when his political base has begun to fracture under the weight of scandal and failure, and when the financial system has crushed him with judgments that threaten his entire business empire. We are living through a moment when every major institution in American life has turned against him simultaneously. And the convergence of all these pressures has created a situation where the normal processes of accountability feel dangerously slow. When every institution is moving against you, when there is no political path forward and no legal path forward and no financial path forward, when the walls are closing in from every direction and the only question is which one reaches you first, then the options narrow to almost nothing. And in that narrowing, arrest starts to look not like an extreme measure, but like the only measure left. The logic becomes cold and clinical. If he cannot be reasoned with, if he cannot be negotiated with, if he cannot be removed fast enough through the constitutional process, then he must be stopped through the only mechanism that remains. There is also something deeper driving these arrest demands, something that goes beyond political calculation or legal strategy. There is a genuine and growing belief among lawmakers who have access to intelligence briefings and national security assessments that Trump is genuinely dangerous. Not politically dangerous in the way that opposition parties always consider each other dangerous, but actually dangerous in the way that keeps security professionals awake at night. Lawmakers are looking at Trump's behavior not through the lens of partisan advantage, but through the lens of threat assessment. They see his attacks on judges, explicit threats against members of the judiciary who have ruled against him. They see his threats against Congress, language that would trigger law enforcement investigations if directed at any other target. They see his social media posts, the increasingly unhinged rants that seem to come at all hours without any filtering from staff or lawyers. They see all of this, and they conclude that this man is too unstable to remain in power, too unpredictable to have access to the nuclear football, too willing to cross lines that no previous president has even approached. And that conclusion, reached by serious people who spent their careers in national security before entering politics, is driving them toward the once unthinkable proposition that arrest might be the only way to neutralize the threat before it manifests in some catastrophic form. The road to this moment has been long and winding, but the destination has become visible for anyone willing to look. We did not wake up one morning to find Congress suddenly demanding the president's arrest. This is the culmination of months of escalating crisis, of dominoes falling in sequence, of each disaster feeding into the next until they created a compound emergency that normal processes cannot contain. Trump returned to office with every advantage a president could want. He had the White House. He had his party unified behind him. He had a judiciary that included many of his own appointees. He had the entire executive branch at his command. He had everything. And then, over the course of months, rather than years, all of it collapsed. His approval ratings fell sharply as the public absorbed the full implications of his return to power. His party began to splinter as senators calculated the electoral consequences of continued loyalty. Judges began ruling against him in case after case, establishing a pattern of legal defeat that undermined his entire governing strategy. His financial empire came under assault from judgments and penalties that threatened his personal wealth in ways he had spent decades avoiding. His base, the supposedly unshakable foundation of his political strength, began to show cracks as scandal fatigue and economic anxiety eroded the enthusiasm that once seemed inexhaustible. Each of these collapses would have been serious on its own. Together, they created a cascade that has left Trump isolated in ways that no president in modern history has experienced. And now, with every other pillar of his power crumbled, with no political allies willing to stand with him, no legal strategies left to pursue, and no financial resources to deploy, the final question has become whether he will be allowed to remain in the White House for even one more day. These demands are specifically tied to the impeachment process in ways that create legal and constitutional momentum. Once the House voted to impeach, once they formally determined that Trump had committed high crimes and misdemeanors, they established a predicate for further action. Impeachment is not just a political statement. It is a constitutional determination that carries legal implications. It establishes that the House believes the president has engaged in conduct that justifies removal from office. And once that determination is made, once the House has spoken with the full authority of its constitutional role, the question naturally arises. If the conduct warrants removal, does it also warrant arrest? The legal theory being developed in memos and white papers and informal discussions among constitutional lawyers goes something like this. If Trump has committed high crimes and misdemeanors, if he has obstructed Congress and abused his power and engaged in conduct that the House has formally deemed impeachable, then those same actions might constitute federal crimes. Obstruction of Congress is not just an impeachable offense, it is a potential criminal violation. Abuse of power may not have a specific statutory counterpart, but the underlying conduct, the misuse of government authority for personal gain, the deployment of federal resources against political enemies, these things can be charged under existing criminal laws. If the conduct is criminal, if it violates federal statutes that carry prison sentences, then arrest is not just a political act. It is a law enforcement action based on probable cause that a crime has been committed. And if the person who committed those crimes happens to be the sitting president, the constitutional question becomes whether the presidency provides immunity from arrest as well as immunity from prosecution. The Constitution does not explicitly say the president cannot be arrested. The Supreme Court has never ruled that a sitting president enjoys absolute immunity from law enforcement action. The question has simply never arisen because no previous president has ever engaged in conduct that prompted serious discussion of arrest while in office. Trump has now forced the legal system to confront questions that were previously left to academic speculation because no one imagined they would ever need practical answers. His behavior since the impeachment vote has only accelerated the momentum toward arrest. Rather than showing any restraint, rather than signaling any willingness to accept the constitutional process, he has escalated. He has continued attacking judges with language that grows more threatening each day. He has continued threatening investigators and prosecutors and witnesses. He has continued posting content that his own former advisors describe as unhinged. He has shown absolutely no remorse, no recognition that his conduct might have crossed lines, no willingness to de-escalate the crisis he created. Lawmakers look at this behavior and they see someone who will not stop, who cannot stop, who will keep pushing and escalating until something breaks. And they are asking themselves what happens when that something is the constitutional order itself. There is a genuine and well-founded fear about what Trump might do in his final days or weeks in office if he believes removal is inevitable. A president who knows he is about to lose power has access to tools that could cause immense damage on his way out. He could issue pardons for himself and his allies, attempting to place himself beyond the reach of future prosecution. He could destroy evidence, ordering the shredding of documents and the deletion of files that would be crucial to future investigations. He could deploy the military, invoking emergency powers to create a crisis that might delay or disrupt the constitutional process. He could incite violence, calling his supporters into the streets in numbers that would overwhelm law enforcement. He could attack judges or members of Congress directly, using the platform of the presidency to target individuals who have moved against him. These are not fantasies concocted by paranoid critics. These are scenarios that national security professionals are actively planning for, running tabletop exercises to game out how the government would respond if a cornered president attempted to use his remaining powers to obstruct his own removal. The arrest demands are driven in part by the recognition that waiting for the Senate trial to conclude might give Trump exactly the window he needs to do something catastrophic. If arrest removes him from the equation immediately, if it takes him out of the Oval Office and away from the levers of power, then the window closes. Then the nightmare scenarios become impossible. Then the constitutional process can proceed without the constant threat that the subject of that process will use his remaining authority to blow up the system rather than accept its judgment. The constitutional implications are staggering. No sitting president has ever been arrested by federal law enforcement in the entire history of the American Republic. The founders did not explicitly contemplate this scenario because they assumed that a president facing impeachment and removal would accept the judgment of Congress rather than attempt to cling to power through extra-legal means. They designed a system that depended on certain baseline assumptions about how presidents would behave, assumptions that Trump has systematically demolished. The Constitution does not explicitly prohibit the arrest of a sitting president. It does not explicitly authorize it either. The question has simply never been tested because it has never needed to be tested. What the Constitution does provide is a framework for handling presidential misconduct through impeachment and removal. The House impeaches, the Senate tries the case. If convicted, the president is removed from office and becomes subject to ordinary criminal prosecution. That is the normal process. That is how it is supposed to work. But the normal process assumes a president who will not use the powers of the office to obstruct the process itself. It assumes a president who will not deploy the military against Congress. It assumes a president who will not incite violence to disrupt the trial. When those assumptions no longer hold, when he has demonstrated a willingness to cross every line that previous presidents respected, the normal process may no longer be adequate. The arrest demands also serve a strategic function in the broader effort to remove Trump from power. They are not just expressions of genuine concern about his dangerousness. They are also signals to the Senate, messages designed to accelerate the conviction timeline by making clear what the alternative will be. Every senator who is considering voting to acquit must now weigh that decision against the knowledge that acquittal will not make the crisis go away. If the Senate fails to convict, if Trump remains in office because 17 Republicans refuse to cross the threshold, the arrest demands will only intensify. The calls for extraordinary measures will grow louder. The pressure to remove him through means outside the normal constitutional process will become overwhelming. Senators are being told explicitly and implicitly that they have a choice. They can vote to convict and remove Trump through the constitutional process, preserving at least the appearance that the system worked as designed. Or they can vote to acquit and watch as the crisis escalates toward arrest, toward the spectacle of federal agents entering the White House to take a sitting president into custody. Conviction is orderly. Arrest is chaos. Conviction preserves the Constitution. Arrest suggests the Constitution could not handle the threat. Senators who care about their legacies, who care about how history will judge their actions during this crisis, are being told that the path of conviction is the path that preserves something worth saving. The arrest demands also place Trump in an impossible psychological position. He is facing removal from office and the permanent stigma of being the first president convicted by the Senate. He is facing financial collapse and the destruction of the business empire he spent his entire life building. He is facing judicial isolation and the prospect of losing every legal battle he wages. He is facing party abandonment and the realization that the allies who protected him through previous scandals have decided he is no longer worth the cost. And now, on top of all of that, he is facing the prospect of arrest. Not metaphorical arrest or political arrest, but actual arrest. Handcuffs and custody and the loss of physical freedom. That is a level of pressure that would break almost anyone. And Trump, for all his bluster and bravado, has never faced anything like this before. He has always been able to find an escape route. He has always had a lawyer who could negotiate a settlement or a political ally who could make a problem disappear. He has always had the resources and the instincts to wiggle out of consequences that would have destroyed anyone else. But this time, there is no escape route. The lawyers cannot make arrest demands disappear. The political allies have abandoned him. The resources are being drained by judgments and penalties. For the first time in his life, Trump is facing consequences he cannot evade. And the psychological weight of that realization is driving the increasingly erratic behavior that makes arrest seem more necessary each day. The practical feasibility of actually arresting a sitting president is another question entirely, and the honest answer is that it probably cannot be done while he remains in office and retains control of the executive branch. The Secret Service is sworn to protect the president. The military chain of command runs through him as commander-in-chief.